Right. The tunnel level at first began to angle steeply upwards as Will went on, leaving Horace behind him. The walls and floor showed evidence of the Celts' picks and drills as they had torn and gouged at the rock to widen the path. Will guessed that the original narrow tunnel had been nothing more than a natural fault in the rock, a mere crevice, but as he went on he saw how much it had been widened until there was room for 4 or 5 men to walk abreast. And still it climbed up into the heart of the mountains. A circle of light showed the end of the tunnel. He estimated that he traveled maybe 300 meters in total, and the end was another 40 away. The light that he could see seemed to be stronger than simple moonlight, and as he carefully emerged from the tunnel, he saw why. Here the hills appeared. Here separated, forming a large valley about 200 meters across and half a kilometer long. To one side, the moonlight showed him massive wooden structures leading up to the higher reaches of the plateau. Staircases, he realized after a few moments' study. The floor of the valley was lit with campfires, and there were hundreds of figures moving in the flickering orange light. Will guessed that this would be the assembly area for Morgoth's army. At the moment, it was where the Borgles kept their Celt prisoners at night. He paused, trying to form a picture of the overall situation. The plateau that formed the greatest part of Morgoth's domain was still at least 50 meters above this point, but the staircases and the less formidable slope of the surrounding hills would provide relatively easy access down to this valley. The valley itself must be some 30 meters above the level where the bridge stood. The sloping tunnel would take troops down to the bridge from here. Once again, Holt's words echoed in his ear. Nothing, nowhere is really impossible. He moved to the left of the tunnel mound and found cover in a jumble of rocks and boulders while he took stock of the situation. There was a rough stockade in the center of the valley. Inside the wooden fencing, he could see a large number of small fires, each with a group of figures seated or sprawled around it. This was the prisoners' compound, he guessed. Large fires outside the compound marked the places where the Wogles were camped. He could see the hulking, shambling forms clearly against the firelight as they moved around, yet there was one fire close to him that seemed different. The figures seemed more upright, more humanoid in the way they stood and carried themselves. Obviously, he worked his way closer to it, sliding through the night with barely a sound, moving quickly from one patch of cover to the next, until he was just at the outer ring right of light thrown by the fire, a spot where he knew the darkness by contrast would seem more intense to those sitting around the fire. There was a haunch of some kind of meat roasting slowly over the fire, and the smell of it set his mouth watering. He'd been traveling for days on cold rations, and the meat filled the air with a delicious fragrance. He felt his stomach begin to rumble, and fear stabbed through him. It would be unthinkably bad luck to be betrayed by a rumbling stomach, he thought. The fear did the trick, killing his appetite. His digestion more or less under control, he edged his face around a boulder low to the ground to get a better look at the figures in eating by the fire. As he did so, one of them leaned forward to slice off a chunk of the meat, jangling the hot, greasy food in his hand as he took it. The movement let the firelight shine clearly on him, and Will could see that these were not Wogles. From their rough sheepskin vests, woolen leggings bound with tapes, and heavy fur boots, he recognized them as Canadians. Further study showed him their horned helmets, round wooden shields, and battle axes piled on one side of the campsite. He wondered what they were doing here, so far from their ocean. The man who had moved finished his meat and wiped his hands on his sheepskin vest. He bleached, then settled himself in a more comfortable spot by the fire. domed glow when Ovals met him. "Ere," he said, in the thick, almost indecipherable accent of Scanadia. Will knew that Scanadians spoke the same tongue as the kingdom. Hearing it now for the first time, though, he barely recognized it. The other sea wolves growled the agreement. There were 4 of them round the fire. Will edged forward a little to hear them more clearly, then froze, horrified as he saw the unmistakable shambling form of a Wargle moving directly towards him from the other side of the fire. The Canadians heard him coming and looked up warily. With an immense feeling of relief, Will realized that the creature was not coming towards him, but was approaching the Canadian fire. "Hello," said one of the Canadians in a low voice. "Here comes one of the Morcarth's beauties." The Wargle had stopped on the far side of the fire. He grunted something unintelligible at the group of sea riders. The one who had just spoken shrugged. "Sorry, and some didn't catch that," he said. There was an obvious note of hostility in his voice. The Wargle seemed to sense it. He repeated his statement, growling angry now. Again the circle of Scandinavian warriors shrugged at him. The Wargle grunted again, growing angry by the minute. He gestured at the meat hanging over the fire, then at himself. He shouted at this Canadian now, making eating gestures. "Ugly brute wants our venison," said one of the Canadians. There was a low growl of dissent from the group. "Let him catch his own," said the first man. The Wargle stepped inside the circle now. He had stopped shouting. He simply pointed to the meat, then turned his red, glaring eyes on the speaker. Somehow the silence was more menacing than his shouting had been. "Careful, Eric," warned one of the Canadians. "We're outnumbered here at the moment." Eric scowled at the Wargle for a second, then seemed to realize the wisdom of his friend's advice. He gestured angrily in the meat. "Go and then take it," he said curtly. The Wargle stepped forward and snatched a wooden spit from the fire, taking a huge bite at the meat and tearing a large chunk loose. Even from where he was lying, scarcely daring to breathe, Will could see the ugly light of triumph in the red animal eyes. Then the Wargle turned abruptly and bounded out of the circle, forcing several of the Canadians to move hurriedly aside to avoid being trampled on. They heard its guttural laughter as it faded into the darkness. "Damn things give me the heebies," muttered Eric. "Don't know why we have to have anything to do with them." "'Cause Horth don't trust Morgoth," one of the others told him. If we're not along, these damn bear men will keep all the plunder for themselves, and we'll all get it. All we get is the hard fighting at the plains of Olath, and hard marching too," put in another. "Wouldn't be any fun with horsemen either, working their way round Thorntree Forest to take the enemy in the rear. That's rough going, all right." Will frowned as he heard that. Obviously Morgoth and Horth, who Will assumed was the Scandinavian war leader, were planning another treacherous surprise for the kingdom's forces. He tried to picture a map of the countryside around the plains of Uthal, but his memory was sketchy. He wished he had paid more attention to the geology lessons Holt had taught him. "Why is geography so important?" he remembered asking his teacher. "Because maps are important if you want to know where your enemy is and where he's going," had been the reply. Glumly, Will realized now how right he had been. Holt had shaken his head at him at the time, in that mock-serious way he had. Suddenly thinking of his wise and capable teacher, Will felt very lonely, and more than a little out of his depth. "Anyway," Eric was saying, "things will be different when Ovak's men get here, although they seem to be taking their damn time about it." "Relax," said the other speaker. "It'll take a few days to get 5 undermen 400, 500 men up them south cliffs. Think how long it took us? Yeah, said another, but we were blazing a trail. All they have to do is follow it. Well, they can't get here too soon for me, said Eric, rising and stretching. Well, I'm off to sleep, lads, just as soon as I've done the necessaries. Well, don't do me here by the fire, said one of the others irritably. Go up behind them rocks here. Horrified, Will realized that the Canadian had gestured towards the rocks where he was hiding, and now Eric, laughing at the other man, was turning and heading his way. It was definitely time to go. He scuttled backwards a few meters, then crawling rapidly on his stomach, used all his training and natural skills to blend with the available cover. He had gone perhaps 20 meters when he heard a splashing sound from the spot where he'd been eavesdropping. Then he heard a contented sigh, and looking back saw the shaggy-haired form of Eric silhouetted against the glow of the 100 or so campfires in the valley. Realizing that this Canadian was intent on what he was doing, Will slipped through the darkness and back into the tunnel. He went carefully for the first few meters, allowing his eyes to become accustomed to the dim light of the torches. Then he began to run, his soft hide boots making barely a noise on the sandy floor. Okay, well, thank you for listening to me read chapter 20. If you'd like to listen to me read chapter 1 at 21, then please stay tuned. Thank you. Bye-bye.